Thomas Walker had survived war, loss, and the long road home, but that night, he couldn't even save himself from the cold. Beside him, his loyal canine Rex waited hungry in the snow. Everyone inside the diner noticed them, but no one dared to help. Then, a 2-year-old woman rose from her table, walked straight into the storm, and said the words that would pull a forgotten Marine back from the edge. Before we begin, tell us in the comments what city you're watching from, and if this story touches your heart, please subscribe so you don't miss more stories of loyalty, healing, and quiet miracles. Snow came hard over Duluth, Minnesota, blowing in from Lake Superior and turning the diner parking lot into a pale, frozen world of headlights, silence, and wind. Thomas Walker sat against the brick wall of the North Shore diner, his back pressed so tightly to it that the cold seemed to have entered his bones and decided to stay. He was 39 years old, tall and broad-shouldered in the way some men remained even after life had carved pieces out of them. His dark blonde hair was cut short, military neat but uneven near the back, as if he had trimmed it himself with a cheap mirror and less patience than pride. A rough layer of brown stubble covered his square jaw. His face had hard angles, the kind shaped by discipline, sleeplessness, and too many mornings spent pretending the night before had not broken him. But his eyes were what gave him away. They were gray, sharp, restless, always moving from the road to the diner door to the reflections in the glass, as if danger still wore ordinary clothes and might come smiling through the snow. Once, Thomas had been a Marine who could stand in chaos and make other men feel safe. Now he sat outside a diner with his coat pulled tight, one hand trembling in his lap, trying to convince himself the tremor belonged to the weather. Beside him lay Rex, a 5-year-old German Shepherd K9 with a black saddle across his back, tan legs dusted white with snow, and amber eyes that still carried the bright, severe intelligence of a working dog. Rex was too thin. His ribs showed faintly beneath his winter coat, and the proud thickness of his neck had faded into something lean and tired. Yet there was no surrender in him. His ears stayed upright, his nose lifted whenever a car passed. His body remained angled between Thomas and the rest of the world, as if even hunger had not relieved him of duty. Thomas looked down at the paper-wrapped sandwich in his hand. It was old, flattened from being carried too long in his jacket pocket, the bread dry around the edges, the cheese stiff from the cold. He had bought it the day before with coins dug from the ashtray of his truck. He had told himself he would eat it slowly, make it last, be smart. A small, bitter smile touched his mouth at that thought. Smart. A man who slept in a truck with a failing heater and talked more to a dog than to any living person had a strange relationship with smart. Rex's stomach made a low sound. The dog did not whine. He never did. He only lifted his eyes to Thomas and waited, patient as a soldier awaiting permission. Thomas swallowed, and the ache in his own belly twisted hard enough to make him close his eyes. For 1 second, an old voice inside him told him to split it. Half for Rex, half for him. Fair was fair. Survival was survival. Then Rex shifted closer, pressing his shoulder lightly against Thomas's knee, not begging, just reminding him that he was still there. Thomas broke the sandwich in two, stared at the halves, and then gave both pieces to Rex. "Go on, boy," he murmured, his voice rough from disuse. "You earned it more than I did." Rex looked at him first, always asking, always loyal to the chain of command even when the world had stripped them of everything else. Thomas gave a faint nod. Only then did Rex eat. He ate slowly at first, controlled, almost polite, but the food vanished too quickly to hide how hungry he was. Thomas watched every bite disappear and told himself he felt relief. Relief was easier to admit than shame. Inside the diner, warm yellow light pressed against the fogged windows. People moved behind the glass like figures in another life. Truckers in quilted jackets, an older couple sharing pie, a young mother wiping syrup from a little boy's chin. The smell of coffee, bacon, and butter drifted out each time the door opened, cruel and holy all at once. A few people noticed Thomas. They always did. One man slowed near the entrance, took in the worn military jacket, the shaking hand, the dog, the eyes that did not soften quickly enough, and then looked away. Two women whispered near the window. one with pity in her face, the other with the tight expression of someone already deciding he was trouble. Thomas did not blame them. It was easier for people to step around a broken man than ask what had broken him. He had learned that rule in gas stations, church basements, parking lots, and shelters where the lights never went fully dark. Rex lifted his head, suddenly, not sharply, not fearfully, with purpose. Thomas felt the change before he saw what caused it. The dog's ears tilted forward, and his body grew still in that old, familiar way. Thomas followed his gaze through the fogged glass. At a corner table inside sat an elderly woman in a dark wool coat, one gloved hand resting on a wooden cane. She was small, barely 5 feet tall, with silver white hair pinned into a careful bun and a narrow face lined deeply by time, grief, and stubbornness. Her name was Eleanor Harris, though Thomas did not know that yet. She was 92 years old, a widow with clear blue eyes, and the sort of quiet strength that made younger people lower their voices around her without knowing why. She had been watching him, not with fear, not with disgust, not even with pity. She watched him as if she recognized the shape of his loneliness. Thomas looked away first. That was safer. People who looked too closely usually wanted something, an explanation, an apology, a performance of gratitude, or a reason to feel better about walking away. The diner door opened. Cold wind rushed out, carrying the bell's soft chime into the snow. Thomas heard the slow tap of a cane against concrete. Tap, pause, tap. Rex did not bark. That worried Thomas more than if he had. The old woman came across the parking lot with careful steps, her coat catching snow along the shoulders, her cane sinking slightly into the white crust. She did not hurry, and she did not hesitate. When she reached the small metal table near Thomas, she pulled out the chair opposite him and sat down as if she had been expected. Thomas straightened, embarrassed by the empty wrapper near Rex's paws, by his own shaking hand, by the hunger he could no longer hide. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "you shouldn't sit out here. I'll move." He thought she would tell him to leave, or ask if the dog was dangerous, or offer one of those thin smiles people used when kindness cost them nothing. Instead, Eleanor looked at Rex, then at the untouched hollow beneath Thomas's cheekbones, and said softly, "Son, when was the last time anyone fed you?" Eleanor Harris did not move after asking her question. She simply sat across from Thomas Walker in the falling snow, both gloved hands resting over the curved handle of her cane, her small shoulders squared as if the winter itself had no authority over her. Thomas looked at her, then looked away, because the question had found a place in him that hunger alone had not reached. When was the last time anyone fed you? He could have answered with a joke, with anger, with a kind of hard silence that kept strangers at a safe distance. Instead, he said nothing. Rex stayed close to his knee, licking the last crumbs from the paper wrapper, then lifting his amber eyes toward the old woman with that careful, measuring intelligence working dogs carry like a second spine. Eleanor turned her head toward the diner window and raised one hand. Inside, a waitress paused near the counter, her body half turned, a coffee pot in one hand. She was Sarah Coleman, 32 years old, tall and narrow-shouldered, with auburn hair tied into a loose ponytail that had begun to fall apart from a long morning shift. Her skin was fair, lightly freckled across the nose, and her green eyes held the tired alertness of someone who had learned to be kind without being careless. Sarah had worked at the North Shore Diner for 8 years, long enough to know every regular's coffee order, every lonely widower's favorite booth, and every kind of trouble that came through the front door wearing boots and a bad mood. When she saw Eleanor sitting outside with the man and the dog, worry crossed her face before kindness did. Thomas noticed it. He noticed everything. The tiny tightening of Sarah's mouth, the way her eyes flicked to Rex first, then to his hands, then to the old woman. He knew that look. It meant, "Please, don't make this harder than it has to be." Eleanor called through the glass, calm as a church bell. "Sarah, dear, could you bring 2 hot meals out here?" Sarah blinked. The coffee pot lowered slightly. A few customers turned to look. Thomas immediately shook his head. "No, ma'am, I can't." His voice came out rough, almost ashamed of itself. "I don't have money for that." Eleanor did not even glance back at the diner. "Good thing I do." The answer was so simple, so clean, that had left Thomas with nowhere to place his pride. Pride had once been armor. Pride had kept his boots moving when his body wanted to stop. Pride had told him not to ask, not to need, not to become one more burden someone else had to carry. But lately pride had become something thinner and meaner, a broken shield he kept holding, even after it had stopped protecting anyone. "I'm not looking for charity," he said, though the words sounded smaller than he intended. Eleanor looked at him then, and there was nothing soft or foolish in her eyes. "I didn't say you were." Inside the diner, Sarah hesitated only a moment longer before disappearing toward the kitchen. Behind the counter stood Bill Turner, the owner, a broad man in his mid-50s with a thick chest, heavy forearms, and a face that looked carved from old oak and suspicion. His dark hair had gone gray at the temples. His beard was trimmed short but uneven, and his deep-set brown eyes rarely gave trust before evidence. Bill had inherited the diner from his father and had spent 30 years watching hungry men become angry men, lonely men become dangerous men, and good intentions become broken chairs and unpaid checks. He did not hate people. He simply believed in keeping trouble outside whenever possible. Now he stood with both hands planted on the counter, staring through the window at Thomas like a man studying bad weather. Thomas felt that stare against the side of his face. He almost stood. Almost gathered Rex, turned toward the truck, and let the storm swallow him before anyone could decide what kind of problem he was. Then Eleanor quietly unbuttoned the top of her coat, settled deeper into her chair, and made staying seem less like weakness. A few minutes later, Sarah came out carrying 2 steaming plates, eggs, toast, bacon, and potatoes crisped at the edges, the kind of food that smelled like mornings Thomas had not believed in for years. She moved cautiously over the snow, but her voice was gentle when she set the plates down. "Careful, they're hot." Thomas stared at the food. His stomach clenched so hard it almost hurt. He could feel Sarah watching, Eleanor waiting, Bill watching from inside, half the diner pretending not to. Rex's nose twitched, but the dog did not move toward the plate. He waited for Thomas. That nearly broke him. A starving dog with more discipline than most men Thomas had known. Slowly, Thomas pushed the plate in front of him down toward Rex. "Eat," he whispered. Sarah's expression changed. Not all at once, not dramatically, but something in her face loosened. Fear gave way to confusion, then to something warmer and more painful. Rex looked up for permission. Thomas nodded. Only then did the dog eat, controlled at first, then faster, his hunger betraying what his training tried to hide. Eleanor watched without speaking. Sarah looked down at the second plate, then back at Thomas, as if seeing not a threat, but a man who had lost almost everything except the instinct to protect the one soul still depending on him. "There's more inside if he needs it," she said softly. Thomas did not answer. He picked up his fork only after Rex had eaten several bites. The first mouthful tasted of salt, grease, heat, and humiliation. Then, beneath the humiliation, something worse came. Comfort. He had forgotten comfort could hurt. Eleanor ate slowly across from him, as if they were simply 3 people and a dog having breakfast in the snow. As if there was nothing strange about an old woman choosing a broken stranger over the warmth inside. That ordinary kindness pressed harder on Thomas than pity ever could. At last he set his fork down, looked at the woman who had refused to let him disappear, and said quietly, "Thomas Walker." Eleanor nodded once, like she had been waiting for him to return his own name to the world. "Well then, Thomas Walker," she said, her voice steady beneath the falling snow, "tonight you will not vanish in this storm alone." The snow kept falling around the little metal table, but something in the air had changed. The cold was still there, the hunger was still there, yet Thomas Walker no longer felt entirely outside the world. He sat with both hands wrapped around the chipped coffee mug Sarah had brought him after the meal, letting the heat seep into fingers that had forgotten what warmth could feel like without a price attached. Across from him, Eleanor Harris ate slowly, her posture straight despite her age, her blue eyes calm in a way that made silence feel less like punishment. Rex rested at Thomas's boots, licking a trace of gravy from his muzzle, then settling with his body angled toward the parking lot, still guarding, still listening, but no longer as rigid as before. For a while, no one said anything. Thomas preferred it that way. Words were dangerous things. Once spoken, they had shape. And once they had shape, they could not be shoved back into the dark where he kept them. Eleanor seemed to understand. She did not ask him why his hands shook. She did not ask where he slept. She did not ask why a man with a Marine Corps tattoo fading beneath the cuff of his sleeve looked as if he had been abandoned by every road in America. That patience was worse than interrogation. It gave him room to tell the truth, and the truth had been hunting him for years. "I was a Marine," he said at last, his voice low enough that the wind nearly stole it. "2 deployments. Came home with all my limbs, so folks figured I came home whole." Eleanor's fork paused, but she did not interrupt. Thomas gave a faint, humorless smile. "That's the part people don't understand. Sometimes what follows you back doesn't leave marks where they can point at them." His eyes drifted toward the road, but he was not seeing Duluth anymore. He was seeing dust rising in a foreign street, hearing a metallic blast folded into the sky, feeling the impossible weight of seconds when a man had to decide too quickly and live too long afterward. He blinked hard. Loud noises still do it. A drop tray, a car backfiring, fireworks on the 4th. People laugh because they think it's just nerves, but my body doesn't know I'm home. It still thinks the next sound might take somebody from me. He rubbed one thumb over the dented dog tag hanging beneath his shirt. It had belonged to him once as a symbol of service. Now it felt like a small piece of metal proof that a man could survive and still not know how to live. "I had a wife," he continued. "Laura." Her name came out softer than the rest. Laura Walker had been 36 when she finally left. A petite woman with warm brown skin, dark curly hair she wore pinned up with pencils when she worked from home, and patient hazel eyes that had slowly grown tired from loving a man who kept disappearing while standing right in front of her. She had been a school counselor, the kind of woman who remembered children's birthdays and kept granola bars in her desk for students who came to class hungry. She had not been weak. That was what hurt Thomas most. She had stayed through the nightmares, the broken dishes, the apologies, the mornings when he sat on the edge of the bed unable to explain where his mind had gone. "She tried," he said. "God knows she tried. But there's only so long you can ask someone to live beside a locked door." Rex lifted his head at the change in Thomas's voice. Thomas swallowed, staring down into the dark coffee. "After she left, I told myself it was better, safer. No wife to scare, no house to ruin, no neighbors to hear me shouting at ghosts. Then I lost the warehouse job after I shoved a man who came up behind me too fast. He didn't deserve that. I knew it the second it happened." His jaw tightened. "After that, I drove. Wisconsin, Iowa, Montana, back east, back west. Didn't matter. As long as I kept moving, nobody had time to expect anything from me." Eleanor's face changed then, not with surprise, but recognition. She looked past Thomas toward the gray street, and for the first time her age seemed heavier than her body. "My husband was named Henry Harris," she said quietly. "Tall man. Black hair when I married him, silver by 45, handsome in a stubborn, mule-headed way. He came home from war with broad shoulders and eyes that never rested. People called him lucky because he came back breathing. They didn't see how he sat in our kitchen every night, like a ghost who had forgotten which house to haunt." Her mouth trembled with the smallest smile, touched by grief and old affection. "Henry once told me to leave him, said I deserved a man who was still in one piece. I told him I had not married a vase, I had married a man." Thomas let out a breath that was almost a laugh and almost a wound opening. Eleanor leaned forward slightly, her gloved hands folded over the cane. "It took me years to understand this, Thomas. Some soldiers come home, but their souls get caught behind them, pacing the same battlefield, waiting for someone to call them back by name." Thomas looked at her then, and the world seemed painfully still. "And did he come back?" he asked. Eleanor's eyes shone, but she did not let the tears fall. "Little by little, not all at once, never like in stories, but enough to dance with me in the kitchen again before the Lord took him home." Then she said the words that entered Thomas like a key turning in a rusted lock. "Pain does not take away a person's right to be loved." Thomas did not cry loudly. He did not break down in the snow or bury his face in his hands. He only bowed his head, gripping the old dog tag beneath his shirt until the edges bit into his palm. Rex rose quietly and placed his muzzle on Thomas's boot, warm and steady, as if reminding him that some loyal hearts had never believed he was beyond saving. Morning came pale and slow over Duluth, the storm reduced to a fine white mist drifting over the diner roof and the frozen road beyond it. Thomas Walker had not left. That fact alone felt strange enough to make him uneasy. His old blue pickup sat at the far edge of the parking lot, half buried under snow, its windshield clouded with frost and its rusted bumper wearing a crooked line of ice like an old scar. He had slept there for 3 broken hours, with Rex curled against the passenger seat, the dog's warm body the only thing keeping the cab from feeling like a coffin. Every instinct Thomas owned had told him to drive before sunrise, before Eleanor's words could settle too deeply, before Sarah's kindness became something he might miss, before Bill Turner's suspicion reminded him what people always saw when they looked too long. But when morning came, he had only sat behind the wheel, hands on the cracked steering wheel, unable to turn the key. Now he stood near the diner's side entrance, shoulders hunched beneath his worn coat, watching Sarah Coleman scrape ice from the step with a flat shovel. Sarah looked up when she noticed him. Her auburn ponytail was tucked under a gray knit cap, and the cold had turned her freckled cheeks pink. She studied him carefully, not with the fear from yesterday, but with the cautious gentleness of someone approaching a wounded animal that still had teeth. "You stayed," she said. Thomas glanced toward the truck, then down at Rex, who stood beside him with his ears lifted and his black and tan coat brighter now after 2 meals and a night without hunger clawing at him. "Looks that way," Thomas muttered. Sarah leaned the shovel against the wall. "Bill's short in the back today," dishwasher called out. "Snow's got half the town moving slow." Thomas's jaw tightened before she finished. "I'm not asking for anything. I didn't say you were." There it was again, that same kind of answer Eleanor had used, simple enough to slip past his defenses. Sarah wiped one gloved hand against her apron. "You work, you eat. Rex gets something too. No charity. Just dishes, trash, maybe clearing the walkway if you can handle the cold." Thomas almost laughed. Handle the cold. He had handled worse than cold, though somehow this morning felt harder than nights he had survived under a sky full of fire. Work meant staying. Staying meant being seen. Being seen meant eventually disappointing someone. Still, his stomach was empty, and Rex had lifted his head at the word eat. Thomas looked through the diner window. Bill Turner stood behind the counter, thick arms crossed, his heavy face unreadable beneath the gray shadow of his beard. He did not wave. He did not smile. He only watched as if deciding whether Thomas was a man or a storm waiting to break. Inside, the bell over the door gave a tired jingle when Sarah led them in. Warmth rushed over Thomas so quickly that his skin prickled. Conversation dipped, then recovered in uneven pieces. A retired mailman at the counter lowered his newspaper. 2 women in a corner booth looked at Rex, then at Thomas's boots. Someone whispered, not softly enough, "That's the fellow from outside." Thomas heard it all. He always did. Bill stepped from behind the counter, broad and square, blocking the way to the kitchen like an old gate that had learned suspicion from every winter that slammed against it. "One problem," Bill said, his voice low and gravelly, "and you're gone. Dog too." Rex's ears twitched, but he stayed still. Thomas met Bill's eyes and nodded once. Understood. The work was plain, wet, and endless. Thomas rolled up his sleeves and stood at the sink, while steam rose around his forearms. Plates came in greasy, cups stained brown, forks bent slightly from years of use. He washed them all with the steady rhythm of a man trying to give his mind a narrow road to walk. Scrub, rinse, stack, breathe. When a tray clattered behind him, his shoulders jolted before he could stop them. His hand gripped the sink edge hard enough to whiten his knuckles. For one burning second, the kitchen shrank into heat and metal and old thunder. Then Rex appeared at the back door, watching him. Not pushing, not whining, just there. Thomas breathed out slowly and returned to the dishes. By noon, the whispers had grown braver. A customer near the pie case complained that dogs did not belong inside a diner. He was a thin man, with a red nose and watery eyes. the kind who spoke loudly because he mistook volume for principle. Sarah did not argue. She simply took an old blue towel from beneath the counter, folded it, and placed it beside the back door. Rex stepped onto it as if accepting a post. "He's working," Sarah said, her voice quiet but firm. "He's keeping him here with us." The diner went still for half a breath. Thomas kept his face turned toward the sink, but something inside him weakened, not in defeat, but in relief. No one had explained him like that before. No one had made his need sound less like failure. Outside, snow hid from the roof in soft white sheets. Inside, Thomas washed dishes, cleared tables, carried trash through the back door, and shoveled the walkway until his arms ached. He heard the stairs, felt the doubt, tasted the old urge to vanish. But each time it rose, Rex looked at him. Sarah gave him another task. And somewhere near the front window, Eleanor sat with her cane across her knees, pretending not to watch over him. By closing time, Thomas was still there. Not healed, not safe from himself, not free of the ghosts, but still there. And for a man who had spent years running before anyone could ask him to stay, that was the first small miracle. By late afternoon, the North Shore diner had settled into a tired winter hush, the kind that came after the lunch rush and before evening hunger brought the town back through the door. Thomas Walker stood near the back counter with a towel in one hand, wiping down a stack of clean plates, while Rex rested on the blue towel Sarah had placed by the rear entrance. The dog's head was up, his amber eyes moving quietly from table to table, alert but calm, as if he understood that this room was not safe yet, only possible. Thomas had made it through most of the day without leaving. That should have felt like a victory. Instead, it frightened him. Staying meant the world had more chances to touch him, more chances to test him, more chances to prove that men like him always ruined whatever mercy they were given. Eleanor Harris sat near the front window, with a cup of tea cooling beside her hand, small and straight-backed in her dark wool coat, her cane resting against her knee. Every so often she glanced toward Thomas, not openly enough to embarrass him, but with the quiet watchfulness of someone tending a candle in a drafty room. Bill Turner worked behind the register, still stern, still guarded, though his eyes had lost a little of their earlier hardness. Sarah moved between booths with a coffee pot, her face tired but lighter than it had been that morning. For one fragile hour, the diner felt almost ordinary. Then the doors slammed open. Wind burst inside, carrying snow, cold, and the sour smell of whiskey. A man stumbled in, broad but soft around the middle, wearing a brown canvas jacket stained at the cuffs and boots dark with slush. He was Frank Dawson, 46 years old, with a thick neck, thinning sandy hair plastered damply to his scalp, and a patchy beard that never quite hid the bitterness around his mouth. Frank had once worked loading freight near the harbor, but years of drinking, bad debts, and blaming everyone except himself had left him with a reputation that walked into rooms before he did. His pale eyes were watery but mean, the eyes of a man who searched for weakness the way hungry dogs searched for scraps. Bill saw him first. His shoulders tightened. "Not today, Frank." Frank gave a loose, ugly smile. "Relax, Bill. Just came in for coffee." But his gaze had already found Eleanor. Something changed in his face, a slow satisfaction, as if he had discovered an old bruise and meant to press it. Thomas noticed Sarah stop mid-step. He noticed Bill's hand flatten on the counter. He noticed Rex's ears rise. Frank dragged himself toward Eleanor's table, ignoring the empty stools by the counter. "Well, look at you," he said, his voice too loud, soaked with false cheer. "Still sitting here like the Queen of Duluth." Eleanor looked up at him. Her expression did not change, but her fingers closed tighter around the top of her cane. "Good afternoon, Frank." That calmness angered him more than any insult could have. "Don't good afternoon me." He leaned closer, one hand braced on her table. "Your son still owes people money, you know that? Running off doesn't make a debt disappear." A few customers lowered their eyes. Sarah whispered, "Frank, leave her alone." He turned on her with a crooked grin. "Was I talking to you, sweetheart?" The word came out rotten. Thomas felt the first spark move through him. Not anger yet. Warning. A red light behind the ribs. He set the plate down carefully, because some part of him still knew careful mattered. Eleanor's voice remained steady. "My son is gone, Frank. Whatever he did, He answered to God before he answered to you." Frank slapped his palm against the table so hard the teacup jumped. "Don't hide behind God with me, old woman." The diner went silent. That silence was the door opening inside Thomas's head. Suddenly, he was not looking at a drunk man in a diner. He was looking at a threat closing distance on someone who could not defend herself. His body moved before his mind gave permission. 2 steps. Fast. Clean. His hand caught Frank by the collar and pulled him upright with such force the man's boots scraped backward across the floor. Frank's breath left him in a startled grunt. "Back off," Thomas said. His voice was low, but something under it made the room feel smaller. Frank's grin vanished. "Hey, easy, man." But Thomas barely heard him. The diner blurred. The yellow lights became desert glare. The slap against the table became an explosion somewhere far away. His fingers tightened in Frank's collar. His breathing grew heavier, measured but dangerous, like a gate holding back floodwater. Bill stepped out from behind the counter, then stopped, uncertain whether one more movement would break the wrong thing loose. Sarah stood frozen, one hand over her mouth. Eleanor did not look afraid of Thomas. That almost made it worse. She looked sad, as if she knew exactly where he had gone. Then Rex moved. He did not bark. He did not bare his teeth. He rose from the blue towel, crossed the room with silent certainty, and pressed his head gently against Thomas's leg. Warm, familiar, real. Thomas felt it like a hand reaching down into deep water. Rex stayed there, steady as a promise. Thomas blinked. The diner returned piece by piece. The smell of coffee, the snow melting near the door, Frank's collar in his fist, Eleanor's tea trembling in its cup. Horror passed through him, quiet and cold. He released Frank and stepped back once. Then again, his hands open now, shaking. Frank stumbled away, pale beneath the whiskey flush, and said nothing. No one did. Thomas looked at the floor, ashamed of how close he had come to becoming the thing they feared. But when he finally lifted his eyes, Bill Turner was watching him differently. Not like a danger waiting to happen. Like a man who had stood at the edge of himself and, with a dog's gentle help, chosen not to fall. No one applauded after Frank Dawson stumbled out into the snow, and perhaps that was mercy, because Thomas Walker could not have survived applause. The diner simply breathed again. Chairs creaked, coffee cups lifted, forks touched plates, and the world resumed in small, careful sounds. Yet something had changed. It was not forgiveness exactly, not trust fully grown, but the first green shoot of it pushing through frozen ground. Bill Turner no longer watched Thomas like a storm cloud trapped indoors. He still watched him, of course. Bill was built from caution and old diner debts, and suspicion had long ago taken a lease behind his eyes. But the look had shifted. It now held calculation mixed with reluctant respect, as though Bill had seen a man almost fall into a pit and drag himself back by the fingertips. Sarah Coleman began leaving a bowl of chopped eggs and warm scraps near the back door for Rex, pretending it was food that would have been thrown away anyway. Rex accepted it with the grave dignity of an old soldier receiving rations. His coat gained a faint shine over the next few days, the black saddle darkening again, the tan around his legs less dulled by dirt and hunger. He still watched every door, every boot step, every sudden hand. But when Sarah passed, his tail gave a slow, careful sweep against the towel. Thomas noticed all of it. He noticed Bill sliding him regular tasks without saying they were regular. He noticed customers lowering their voices when he walked by, not because they feared him as much, but because shame had begun to visit them. He noticed Eleanor Harris still sitting by the window each morning, small beneath her dark coat, her blue eyes bright with that ancient, stubborn kindness that made him feel both protected and exposed. 3 days after Frank, Eleanor asked Thomas to drive her home after a routine checkup at a small clinic near the harbor. He said it lightly, as if it were nothing, but Thomas saw the way her hand trembled when she reached for her cane and the way she paused before stepping off the curb. He did not make a ceremony of helping her. He simply opened the truck door, cleared the snow from the seat, and waited until she settled in. Rex sat in the back, alert and silent, while Eleanor looked around the battered cab with no judgment at all. Her house stood near the edge of town where the road bent toward a line of bare birch trees. It was a narrow white house with peeling paint, a sagging porch, and window frames that wore frost on the inside of the glass. The place was clean but tired in the way old houses became when one aging pair of hands had been fighting winter alone for too many years. Thomas carried her grocery bag inside and felt the draft before he saw the cracked seal beneath the kitchen window. The furnace coughed twice from the basement, then fell into a tired rattle. A loose board groaned under his boot near the porch door. Eleanor saw him noticing. "Old houses complain," she said. "So do old women. Best not to answer either one too often." Thomas almost smiled. Almost. But the humor faded when he saw the wood stacked too far from the back steps and the toolbox in the corner with a broken latch, as if she had intended to fix things long after her body had stopped agreeing to the plan. He said nothing that afternoon. Men like Thomas did not always know how to speak gratitude, but they knew how to tighten screws, seal cracks, split wood, and make a door close properly against the night. The next morning, he returned with an old metal toolbox from his truck, its red paint chipped, its handle wrapped with duct tape. He fixed the kitchen window first, pressing new weather stripping along the frame with the concentration he had once given to equipment that meant life or death. Then he reinforced the loose porch board, adjusted the back door, cleaned the furnace filter, and hauled firewood close enough that Eleanor would not have to cross the icy yard. Day after day, he found something broken and put his hands to it. A hinge, a step, a latch, a gutter heavy with ice. Each repair was small, almost laughably small. Yet inside Thomas, each one landed like a prayer spoken without words. He could not repair the convoy road. He could not repair Laura's exhausted eyes. He could not repair every night he had frightened himself awake. But he could make Eleanor's window stop crying cold air into the kitchen. He could make her porch hold steady beneath her feet. He could make Rex strong again. One evening, Thomas sat in his truck outside the diner, Rex asleep across the seat, when his old phone buzzed. The name on the screen made his chest tighten. Mike Reynolds? Mike was 45 now, a former gunnery sergeant with a compact, hard-built frame, a shaved head, iron gray beard, and calm brown eyes that had once made younger Marines believe chaos could be negotiated with. He had led men through fire and carried the guilt of those he could not bring home with a quietness that never asked for pity. Thomas answered with one word, Walker. Mike exhaled softly. "Didn't know if you'd pick up." He told Thomas about a security position near Minneapolis. Steady pay, veteran-owned company, work that needed discipline more than charm. "They need someone like you," Mike said. Thomas looked through the windshield at the diner lights, at Sarah wiping down the counter, at Bill locking the register, at Eleanor's small silhouette near the window. For the first time, staying did not feel like surrender. Leaving did not feel like running either. It felt like a door. The next morning, he told Eleanor. She listened without interrupting, then touched his sleeve with two thin fingers. "You do not owe me your life," she said. "I only hope you do not bury it again." The day Thomas Walker left Duluth, the snow had finally stopped, leaving the town quiet beneath a pale morning sky and a clean silver light rising over Lake Superior. The cold remained, but it no longer felt like a sentence. It felt like weather, nothing more. Something a man could button his coat against and keep walking through. Thomas stood beside his old blue pickup in the North Shore Diner parking lot, one hand resting on the open driver's door, the other holding the strap of the duffel bag. Sarah had insisted on stuffing with clean socks, a thermos, and two sandwiches wrapped so tightly they looked prepared for a military operation. Rex stood at his side, stronger now, his black and tan coat brushed clean, his ribs no longer showing so sharply, his amber eyes bright with the old working dog fire. Around his neck was a new navy blue scarf Sarah had tied there that morning, pretending not to get emotional while she fussed with the knot. "He looks official," she said, her auburn hair loose around her fair, freckled face, her green eyes shining despite the joking tone. "Like he's about to inspect the kitchen." Rex sneezed once, which made Sarah laugh and wipe quickly beneath one eye as if the cold had done it. Bill Turner came out last, broad shoulders hunched under his heavy coat, gray-streaked beard trimmed close, expression as rough as ever, though it had lost the wall of suspicion that once stood between him and Thomas. He shoved a brown paper bag into Thomas's hand. "Leftovers," Bill said gruffly. Don't make a thing of it. Thomas looked inside and saw fresh biscuits, ham, 2 slices of pie, and a small container marked Rex in Sarah's handwriting. He looked back at Bill. Bill scowled harder, as if daring him to say thank you. So Thomas only nodded. Appreciated. Bill cleared his throat. You get settled in Minneapolis, you call. Not because I care, because I don't like unfinished payroll paperwork. Sarah rolled her eyes. He means he'll miss you. I mean paperwork, Bill muttered, but he turned away before anyone could see his face clearly. Eleanor Harris stood near the diner steps, small beneath her dark wool coat, her white hair pinned neatly despite the breeze, both thin hands folded over the head of her cane. She did not cry. Eleanor was not the sort of woman who gave grief the satisfaction of making a spectacle, but Thomas saw the slight tremble in her fingers, and that was almost harder to bear. He walked to her slowly. For a moment, he was afraid to touch her, afraid that if he hugged the woman who had first sat down beside him in the snow, something inside him would split open, and all the words he had not known how to say would come pouring out. Eleanor solved that by lifting one frail hand and touching his sleeve. Go live, Thomas, she said. That is all the thanks I need. He bent and hugged her gently, careful of her bones, but she patted his back with surprising firmness. It was not the embrace of a soldier leaving for war. It was the embrace of a man beginning to believe he could return to life without betraying the dead, the lost, or the woman he had once been. When he stepped back, Rex moved to Eleanor and pressed his head lightly against her knee. She smiled then, a small, bright thing in the winter air. You take care of him, she told the dog. Rex looked up as if the order had been received and understood. Thomas opened the truck door, ready at last, when Rex suddenly turned his head toward the outdoor tables. Thomas followed his gaze. A young man sat alone at the same metal table where Thomas had once sat with an empty stomach and a heart full of locked rooms. The man was in his late 20s, maybe 29, with a lean frame folded inward beneath a clean but wrinkled gray coat. His brown hair was short but uncombed, his jaw covered with a day's worth of dark stubble, and his face had the pale, hollow look of someone who had not slept well or eaten with any pleasure in a long time. His name was Ryan Miller, though Thomas did not know that yet. He had the sort of tired blue eyes that did not search for help because they no longer believed help was a thing people offered without a reason. A full cup of coffee sat untouched before him, steam fading into the cold. Rex stepped away from Thomas first. Not quickly, not dramatically. He simply crossed the snow and sat near Ryan's table, quiet and steady, watching the young man with the same patient certainty he had once given Thomas. Ryan blinked, startled, then looked from the dog to Thomas. And there it was, that distant, frightened emptiness Thomas knew too well. The look of a man sitting at the edge of disappearing. Thomas stood still for one heartbeat, then another. He thought of Eleanor crossing the parking lot through the snow. He thought of Sarah's towel by the back door. He thought of Bill's bag of leftovers. He thought of every small mercy that had found him when he had no map left for himself. Then he shut the truck door and walked back. He pulled out the chair across from Ryan and sat down. He did not preach. He did not ask for the wound's name. He did not offer pity, which often landed too close to insult. He only rested his hands on the table and said, "My name is Thomas. Tonight, you don't have to sit alone." Years later, Thomas would take the security job near Minneapolis, and he would be good at it, not because he had become unbreakable, but because he had learned that broken things could still guard doors. Every winter, he and Rex returned to Duluth. They fixed what needed fixing at Eleanor's house, ate at the North Shore Diner, and listened while Bill complained about nothing important. Near the register hung a framed photograph of Thomas, Rex, and Eleanor standing before her repaired porch. Sunlight caught on the windows Thomas had sealed with his own hands. Beneath it hung Thomas's old dog tag and a small handwritten line Sarah had taped there. Sometimes grace is just someone who refuses to walk away. Sometimes a miracle does not arrive with thunder, light, or a voice from the heavens. Sometimes God sends it through an old woman who sits beside a forgotten man, a loyal dog who refuses to give up, or a stranger who chooses not to walk away. Thomas did not have his past erased, but he was reminded that pain, is not the end of a person's story. In our daily lives, we may pass someone carrying a battle we cannot see. A kind word, a warm meal, a patient heart, or simply sitting beside them may become the mercy they prayed for in silence. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of love, healing, and quiet miracles. May God bless you, protect your family, and guide your steps always.